The sharp crack of a Winchester rifle echoed across the Montana prairie as Forrest Blackwood dropped another coyote that had been stalking his cattle. The year was 1879, and for a 30-year-old rancher with 1,500 acres to his name, life had settled into a predictable rhythm until that stormy April night when everything changed. Rain lashed against the weathered planks of Forrest's barn as he finished his evening rounds. His boots squelched in the mud as he pushed open the heavy door, lantern held high. The horses nickered softly, but another sound caught his attention, a faint rustle from the hayloft that wasn't the usual scurrying of barn mice. "Who's there?" he called, raising his lantern higher. "I'm armed, so you'd best show yourself." The rustling stopped. Forrest set his jaw and climbed the ladder one-handed, the other still gripping his revolver. As the light reached the hayloft, he saw a bundle of dirty cloth shift, and then a pair of wide, terrified eyes met his. A woman, no, a young lady, perhaps 20 or so, was huddled against the hay, her dark hair tangled with straw, her dress torn and mudded. A nasty bruise colored her left cheek, and she held a small knife pointed toward him with trembling hands. "Don't tell," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please, don't tell anyone I'm here." Forrest lowered his gun slowly. "I'm not aiming to hurt you, miss. Are you in some kind of trouble?" "They'll kill me if they find me," she said, the knife still raised defensively. Rain hammered on the roof above them, and a flash of lightning illuminated the loft. In that brief moment, Forrest saw the raw fear in her eyes and something else, determination. "My name's Forrest Blackwood. This is my ranch. You're safe here for now," he said, keeping his distance. "Might I know your name?" she hesitated. "Ruby," she finally said. "Ruby Callahan." "Well, Miss Callahan, you can't stay in this cold barn. There's a spare room in my house. You can clean up, get some food, and we'll figure things out." "No," her voice rose with panic. "If anyone sees me, I just need to hide until I can move on. Please, don't tell anyone." Forrest considered her for a long moment. His mother had raised him to be a gentleman, but harboring a fugitive, which she clearly was, could bring all manner of trouble. "I won't tell anyone tonight," he promised. "But you need to get warm and dry before you catch your death." After some persuasion, Ruby followed him through the rain to his 2-story ranch house. Forrest lit lamps in the kitchen and warmed up some stew while Ruby sat nervously at the table, her eyes darting to the windows with every sound from outside. "Those men?" Forrest asked as he placed a steaming bowl before her. "The ones looking for you. Who are they?" Ruby stared at the food, hunger warring with caution. "The Harrington gang. I worked at a saloon in Copper Creek. Frank Harrington decided I belonged to him." Her hand unconsciously touched the bruise on her face. "When I refused him, he got angry. Said if I wouldn't be his woman willingly, he'd make sure I had no choice." Forrest's grip tightened on his cup. "And you ran?" She nodded, finally taking a spoonful of stew. "3 days ago. They've been tracking me since." "Copper Creek's 50 miles from here," Forrest said, impressed despite his concern. "You covered that on foot." "Stole a horse the first night," Ruby admitted. "But I had to let it go when I crossed Fletcher's Creek. Been walking since then." The storm raged outside as they talked. Ruby revealed little more about herself, but Forrest learned she was 22, orphaned at 16, and had been working in saloons across 3 territories since then. "You can stay the night," Forrest decided. "Tomorrow we'll figure something out." He showed her to the spare room that had once belonged to his younger brother before he'd moved east to Boston. As Ruby thanked him and closed the door, Forrest stood in the hallway, wondering what kind of trouble he'd invited into his home. Morning brought clear skies and a decision. Over breakfast, Forrest proposed a solution. "The Harrington gang has a reputation. They won't stop looking for you," he said. "But they're looking for Ruby Callahan, a saloon girl on the run." Ruby looked up from her coffee. What are you suggesting? What if you weren't Ruby Callahan anymore? What if you were Mrs. Blackwood? Her cup clattered against the saucer. You can't be serious. It would be in name only, Forrest clarified quickly. A business arrangement. You'd have protection, no one questions a man defending his wife, and I could use help running this place. Been on my own since my housekeeper moved to live with her daughter last fall. You're proposing marriage to a stranger you found hiding in your barn? Ruby asked incredulously. Forrest shrugged. It's practical. You need safety, I need help. In a year, if you want to move on, we can say you died. Plenty of women don't survive out here. Ruby studied him, suspicion warring with desperate hope in her eyes. And you'd expect nothing in return. No. Husbandly rights. You'd have your own room, same as now, Forrest promised. I'm offering protection, not ownership. After long consideration, Ruby agreed. But if I find out this is a trick, it's not, Forrest assured her. We'll ride to town today, find the preacher, make it official. From now on, you're Ruby Blackwood, a widow from Kansas City who I corresponded with and married quickly. Can you manage that story? Ruby's smile held a hint of irony. I've been spinning tales to drunk cowboys for years. I think I can handle being a respectable widow. They were married that afternoon by Reverend Porter, with the general store owner and his wife as witnesses. The Reverend seemed surprised at the hasty ceremony, but didn't question it. Two deeply mail-order marriages and quick weddings weren't uncommon in the territory. Well, Mrs. Blackwood, Forrest said as they rode back to the ranch. Welcome to your new home. Life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Ruby proved to be capable around the house, cooking and cleaning with an efficiency that surprised Forrest. In turn, he taught her about the ranch, how to tend the vegetable garden, feed the chickens, and help with the easier ranch chores. They were cautious with each other, maintaining a polite distance. Forrest kept his word about separate rooms and made no advances, though he couldn't help noticing how Ruby's presence had transformed the empty house into something that felt like a home again. The first test of their arrangement came 3 weeks later when Forrest's neighbor, Jim Davidson, rode over with his wife for dinner, a social call they'd made regularly before Ruby's arrival. So you finally went and got yourself hitched? Jim boomed, pumping Forrest's hand. Always said you needed a woman's touch around here. Ruby played her part perfectly, sharing the fictional story of their correspondence and courtship with just the right mix of shyness and warmth. By the end of the evening, even shrewd-eyed Martha Davidson seemed convinced. You did well, Forrest told Ruby after their guests left. They believed every word. Like I said, spinning tales is something I know. Ruby's smile faded, though I've never pretended to be someone respectable before. Forrest studied her in the lamplight. Maybe you're not pretending. Maybe you just never had the chance to be respectable before. As spring turned to summer, their cautious arrangement began to shift. Ruby no longer flinched when Forrest entered a room unexpectedly. Forrest found himself looking forward to returning to the house after long days working the range. Their conversations over meals grew longer, more personal. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Ruby finally told him the rest of her story about growing up in a St. Louis orphanage, about the family that had taken her in at 14 only to treat her like a servant, about her flight west at 16 with dreams that quickly soured in the harsh reality of frontier life. I'm not proud of how I've lived, she finished quietly, but I did what I had to do to survive. There's no shame in survival, Forrest said. My father used to say the measure of a person isn't how they fall, but how they rise afterward. Ruby glanced at him. And what's your story, Forrest Blackwood? Why is a man like you living alone on this big ranch? It was Forrest's turn to share about inheriting the ranch when his father died 5 years earlier, about his mother passing soon after from grief, about his younger brother choosing books over cattle and heading east to make his fortune. "There was a girl once," he admitted, "daughter of a banker in town. We were to be married, but when the cattle prices fell 2 years ago and I nearly lost the ranch, she decided a struggling rancher wasn't what she wanted after all." "Her loss," Ruby said softly, and something in her voice made Forrest look at her differently. In July, word reached them that Frank Harrington had been killed in a shootout with a marshal in Wyoming Territory. His gang had scattered to the winds. "You're free," Forrest told Ruby that night. "If you want to move on, reclaim your life, you can." Ruby stood by the window, lamplight gilding her profile. What life would I reclaim? Ruby Callahan, the saloon girl, that was never a life, just survival. She turned to face him. Unless you want me to go." "No," Forrest said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "That's not what I want at all." Something changed between them that night, nothing dramatic, just a quiet acknowledgement that their arrangement had become something more than convenience. Forrest began bringing Ruby wildflowers from the range. Ruby started leaving his favorite pie cooling on the windowsill when she knew he'd had a hard day. In August, catastrophe struck. A flash flood washed out part of the eastern pasture fence, and dozens of cattle escaped. Forrest and his 2 ranch hands worked desperately to round them up before rustlers or wolves got to them. Ruby, seeing them overwhelmed, saddled a horse and rode out to help despite having minimal riding experience. She managed to turn a group of strays back toward the ranch but got caught in a sudden downpour miles from the house. When she didn't return by nightfall, Forrest rode out in a panic. He found her sheltering in a lined shack, soaked and shivering but alive. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, relief making his voice harsh as he wrapped his dry coat around her. "That you needed help," she answered simply. "That's what wives do, isn't it?" The word hung between them. Not a pretend wife, not a business arrangement, but a real partner. That night, huddled together for warmth in the tiny shack as rain drummed on the roof, Forrest kissed Ruby for the first time. It was gentle, questioning, and when she responded by pulling him closer, something that had been building between them for months finally found release. "I never expected this," Ruby whispered later as they lay together on the narrow bunk. "When I hid in your barn that night, I was just trying to stay alive until morning." Forrest traced the curve of her cheek, the bruise long faded. "And now I'm trying to build a life worth living," she said. "With you, if you'll have me, for real this time." When they returned to the ranch the next day, Forrest moved his things into Ruby's room. Their marriage, begun as pretense, had become truth. Autumn brought the cattle drive to the railhead in Billings, the most dangerous time of the ranching year. Ruby insisted on maintaining the house perfectly for Forrest's return, determined to prove herself a worthy rancher's wife. The night before he was due back, 3 riders approached the ranch. Ruby recognized one immediately: Joel Harper, Frank Harrington's right-hand man. Heart pounding, she loaded Forrest's shotgun and positioned herself by the window. The men dismounted at the gate. "Evening, madam," Harper called. "Looking for a woman named Ruby Callahan. Heard she might be in these parts." Ruby stepped onto the porch, shotgun visible but not raised. "There's no one here by that name. I'm Mrs. Blackwood. My husband's due back with his men any time now." Harper squinted at her in the fading light. "You look mighty familiar." "I get that sometimes," Ruby said evenly. "Now state your business or move along. It's not proper for men to call on a married woman after dark." The tense standoff might have escalated if not for the sound of approaching horses, Forrest and his men returning early. Harper and his companions quickly mounted up and rode off, unwilling to tangle with a larger group. When Ruby told Forrest who the men were, his face hardened. "They'll be back." "I know," she said, "but I'm not running anymore." They didn't have to wait long. The next day, Harper returned alone, catching Ruby in the garden when Forrest was checking fences in the north pasture. "Thought I recognized you, Ruby girl," he said, blocking her path to the house. "Frank might be gone, but he owed me money. Figure you're the next best thing to collect from." "My name is Ruby Blackwood," she said firmly, gripping her garden shears. "And you're trespassing." Harper laughed. "Playing house with the rancher. Does he know what you really are? What you've done?" "He knows everything," came Forrest's voice from behind Harper. He stood with his rifle trained on the intruder. "And you're on my land, threatening my wife." The confrontation ended with Harper departing, but not before promising this wasn't over. That night, Ruby couldn't sleep. "Maybe I should leave," she said as they lay in bed. "As long as I'm here, they'll keep coming. They'll tell everyone in town what I was." Forrest pulled her closer. "You're my wife, nothing else matters." "The scandal could ruin you," Ruby insisted. "People respect you here." "Let them talk," Forrest said. "We'll face it together." The opportunity came sooner than expected. On Sunday, they attended church as usual, but whispers followed them down the aisle. Harper had been busy in town the previous day, spreading stories about Ruby's past. After the service, Martha Davidson approached them, her expression pinched. "Is it true?" she asked Ruby. "Were you really a woman of ill repute?" Before Ruby could answer, Forrest took her hand firmly in his. "My wife was a survivor who did what she had to do in a world that offers few choices to women alone. Now she's my partner, my heart, and the best thing that ever happened to me. Anyone who can't see that isn't welcome at our table anymore." The church fell silent. Then Jim Davidson stepped forward, clapped Forrest on the shoulder, and loudly invited them both to dinner the following Sunday. The tension broke as other ranchers and their wives came forward to show their support. Not everyone, but enough. Harper and his men made one final attempt a week later, riding onto the ranch at dusk with clear intentions. But Forrest had prepared, and neighboring ranchers had spread the word. When Harper found himself facing not just Forrest but 5 other armed ranchers who'd come to stand with their neighbor, he finally admitted defeat. "You ain't worth the trouble, Ruby," he spat before riding away for good. That winter was the happiest of Forrest's life. The ranch prospered, and their home grew warmer with each passing day. Ruby revealed hidden talents. She could play the piano Forrest's mother had insisted on bringing from St. Louis years ago, filling the house with music on long winter evenings. She had a gift with animals, and even the most skittish horses calmed under her touch. In spring, Ruby planted an extensive garden, adding flowers among the vegetables. "Something just for beauty's sake," she explained when Forrest teased her about the impractical roses. In June of 1880, just over a year after Ruby had hidden in his barn, Forrest took her to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. The wildflowers were in full bloom, painting the prairie in swaths of color. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. Inside was a gold band with a small diamond, a proper wedding ring to replace the simple band they'd used for their hasty ceremony. "I thought we could do this right," Forrest said. "Renew our vows, have a proper celebration. Not because we need to, but because I want the world to know how much I love you." Ruby's eyes filled with tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I never thought I'd find this," she whispered. "Not just safety or respectability, but love, real love." "When I found you in that barn," Forrest said, "I was just trying to help someone in trouble. I never imagined I was meeting the woman who would change my life." They renewed their vows that summer with the whole community in attendance. Ruby wore a proper wedding dress ordered from Denver, and Forrest couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him in the flower-bedecked church. That autumn, Ruby shared the news that their family would be growing. Their son, Frederick James Blackwood, was born the following May, a strong, healthy boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's determined chin. As the years passed, the Blackwood ranch flourished. Ruby's past occasionally resurfaced in whispers when new folks moved to the area, but the community that had embraced her closed ranks each time. 2 more children joined their family, a daughter, Rose, and another son, Robert. Sometimes at night, Ruby would still wake from nightmares of her time on the run, the fear so real she could taste it. But Forrest was always there, his arms a sanctuary she never had to flee from. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Ruby took Forrest's hand. "Do you ever regret it, taking in a stranger that night?" Forrest's laugh lines deepened as he smiled. "Best decision I ever made, finding you in that barn." "I was so scared," Ruby admitted. "Not just of Harrington, but of everything, of trusting anyone ever again." And now, Ruby leaned her head against his shoulder, watching their oldest son teach his sister how to lasso a fence post. "Now I know what my mother used to tell me before she died, that home isn't a place. It's the people who love you." In 1899, 20 years after that stormy night, the Blackwoods hosted a celebration for their anniversary. The ranch had grown to over 5,000 acres, and Frederick, now 19, was preparing to take over more responsibilities. Rose, 17, had her father's head for business and was already keeping the ranch books. Young Robert, 15, had inherited his mother's gentle way with animals and could gentle the wildest horse in the territory. As the sun set on their gathered friends and family, Forrest raised a toast. "To second chances," he said, his eyes finding Ruby's across the table. "And to a woman brave enough to take one." Later, as they stood alone on the porch of the house that had become the heart of their world, Ruby thought about the desperate girl who had hidden in a stranger's barn all those years ago. "I was running away that night," she said softly. "I never dreamed I was actually running toward everything I ever wanted." Forrest wrapped his arms around her, his touch still sending warmth through her after all these years. "I'm glad you didn't keep running." "How could I?" Ruby smiled up at him. "You asked me to stay." As the stars emerged above the Montana prairie, Ruby Blackwood, once a frightened fugitive, now the beloved matriarch of a thriving family, leaned into her husband's embrace, secure in the knowledge that some sanctuaries, once found, last a lifetime.